Okay, thank you. Yeah. So
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 if
yeah.
you were, oh, go ahead.
Go,
I'm sorry.
go ahead, Roxy. Go ahead.
Oh, just to give you my feedback, I put all tens at every point because I honestly can't critique when you guys really stood on a very high standard as far as I'm concerned. Like, I was telling Anna, I've had several things to occur just to even keep this commitment every Saturday, internet connection and all these things, and even just the joint connection with Eric in West Georgia. So I'm thoroughly pleased. I believe I did receive every um, email from Anna on Wednesday. Very prompt, very orderly. I would say that you guys, just get 5 stars in my opinion. I think that the information that was delivered to us was extremely useful. Things that I can actually, with a startup, I don't have any critiquing, any criticizing because this was really high standard. I did not know what to expect, but I guess I can say that it did exceed my expectations. I've participated in a function like this before, and different flavor, different energy, and you guys, different is not a negative thing. I like the flow of the intimacy with everything, how you guys organized it. So I am in support of what Rodney and my other colleagues said about the continuing education, and so something that we can continue to add on and move to different levels and steps to logistically carry out what our goals are. So Mr. Wendell, thank you for that. I'm sorry. So I just want to say I appreciate all of it and the participation.
All right, thank you, Roxy.
Yeah, if I can give my feedback, I think I certainly was one of the 78% had in my expectation of the academy and my pleasure with all of the presenters and the way that it was organized. I'm gonna take a page from Roxy's vocabulary. The intimacy of it was great. I have no complaints. I can't think of how it could be even better.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for your comments. And again, we've been thinking on this whole process of how we can elevate the discussion and bring more intentionality around people's efforts to develop co-ops. So it's not a new conversation that we entered in. It's an old conversation, and so we worked at hopefully identifying a group that will be able to do that. But in the interim, I certainly will take Rodney's suggestion in terms of reaching out to our network and seeing who out there can we can bring in to help facilitate more conversation around the 5 cooperative types of businesses, and so we'll certainly work at doing that as we meet in early January. Well, we're having a team meeting, and certainly it'll be part of our discussion going forward. Yeah. Again, I just want to emphasize the building of your ecosystems, and how important it could be to engage others in your geographical areas in terms of involvement in understanding, them getting an understanding of cooperatives. And so we'll be sending out marketing material on the spring and fall academy in January. Look for you to share that with your network and your collaborators, and in terms of their knowledge and infusion into this whole work. Because I think that the most important thing that we can offer each other is the sharing of the work. and building intentionality around others learning the work. And so I'm vested in knowledge sharing. And so the more we share the knowledge and awareness of the knowledge, the more that we're able to grow the ecosystem around supporting the work. Because at the end of the day, you want people to have a knowledge. You want them to have the knowledge of what it takes to really grow a cooperative. And it ain't just a simple thing of just coming together saying we're growing a cooperative. It really takes real intentional work to build out the ecosystem, and more importantly, to build it out to be a sustainable ecosystem. And that's what we really want to work at doing, building out sustainability. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Any more input that you want to share?
I started to type in the chat, hearing from different voices from the field. So like, I guess for most of us here, we're all new, and we heard from you, Ron, and we heard from, I would say, folks that have done the work. Maybe from time to time integrating folks who um, um, uh, who once were where we are. So many of the presenters shared groups that they've provided technical assistance to, or shared, or you shared other co-ops that are up and running. Maybe hearing from them from time to time. Yes, I started where you all did. What Ron just said about the sustainable ecosystem is important. I tried 3 times before I got it right. These are some of the lessons that I learned. That would-be practitioner to actual practitioner voice from time to time might be something you could consider as well.
Yes, and we attempted to have that discussion among working groups, and it actually was a session that Johan facilitated. We had to go in a different direction, but yeah, we wanted to have that a session be framed around bringing other folks into the space so that they can share their knowledge and experience about what it's taken them to along this journey of developing a co-op at different levels. So I'll certainly make sure that going forward that we work at putting that session more intentionality around bringing people into the space that can share their experiences with the groups in terms of how they've gotten to a point where they're at right now, what it's taken in them in terms of building out their cadre of cooperatives, the experiences they've had, be good, bad, indifferent, around growing their cooperative businesses. So yeah, so certainly, Rodney, thank you for sharing that, and I'll make sure that we embed that in the next session going forward. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else anybody wants to share? All right. Well, today's session is if that's the conclusion of what you want to share. And is there anything else I'm missing that you want to share with folks before we enter into the session?
I think that's about it. I guess like we were talking about the partnerships, and like the last thing we wanted to mention is like starting up academies in your regions. Like in the participants' regions if they're interested. But that's it. That's all.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, certainly we want to work at assisting you and be a resource to you as you grow out your cooperative ecosystems. And so while we do have limited resources, we do have some resources that we can bring to bear in terms of educating individuals about this Cooperative Academy. And certainly, I'm certainly going to be looking at the next level of involvement with your groups in terms of how we can assist you in your efforts. I know Roxy's group that she's working with is already starting. It's already started a co-op, and so they're at a different stage than where the three of you at. But still, I think the organizing is so critical to this work that you continue to always focus on organizing individuals and keeping them connected to education, to ways that they can look at themselves as being integral parts of your cooperatives or their cooperatives if they choose to develop one. I think is really important. All right. Okay. All right. Well, with that said, we'll start the session. Is there anything else, Anna, before I start the session that we need to cover? I think we covered everything.
I think that's all.
Okay. All right. Well, this session, just wanted to give you a heads up, is really Jessica Neerbaum, who we had on board, covered some of this in terms of the history of Black cooperatives. And so we're going to delve into the history of Black cooperatives and look locally at some work that was done in the District of Columbia. But I'm quite sure in all of your communities, there's work that's been done on developing Black cooperatives. And so I would ask that you explore within your own ecosystems what work has been done on developing Black cooperatives. Because I'm quite sure in Baltimore and in Norfolk, Virginia, there was ways that Black folks looked at elevating this model of collectively owned businesses in your areas. So I would ask that you certainly look at exploring and delving into your own areas in terms of where folks have been in terms of developing cooperatives. Because I'm quite sure that, again, that in all your areas that there have been ways that people have elevated this work around collectively owned businesses. All right. So this morning we're going to go through the history of Black cooperative history and the 7 principles of Nuga Saba. And the 7 principles of Nuga Saba that you are talking about are the Kwanzaa principles, the principles of Kwanzaa. And I think that as I talk about using those principles, I think they're really relevant to developing collectively owned Black businesses, and particularly from a cultural perspective, because I think that one of the things that's missing out of the language of cooperative is the cultural component that Black folks bring into the space. So yes, so we'll delve into that. Let's get started, Anna. So what is a cooperative business? Well, a cooperative business is a business voluntarily owned and controlled by the people using its service. It may be operated as a nonprofit or for-profit entity. So some of you are looking at nonprofit governance. Some of you are looking at for-profit governance. But it all entails in terms of as long as it's a cooperative business that's voluntarily owned and controlled by people using its services, it meets the definition of a cooperative. All right. So is any and feel free to interject your thoughts wherever you feel necessary to do. But that's what a cooperative business is. It's just a business that's voluntarily owned and controlled by people using its services. And I'd say that that any business can be a cooperatively owned business. Any area. Go ahead, Wendell.
The last part says controlled by people using its services. I thought it would be controlled by people rendering its services, or I mean, you know, do the people necessarily have to use the service?
Well, that's a good question. I think that it's people using the services directly or indirectly. What are your definition of rendering?
Rendering is for instance, right? A landscaping company, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's owned by the workers who do the landscaping,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't necessarily have a yard, right? So that's that. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something.
Well, first of all, it does it meet the first definition of a business voluntarily owned?
Yes, yes.
Okay, all
and
right,
and control.
and control.
And then it says by people using its services.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, my whole idea, maybe I'm just narrowing because I'm thinking about this landscaping. Maybe my thought is too narrow. But the people who own and control it are the ones who render the services or provide the services.
And the
Mm-hmm.
question here is who provides the services. But I think it's kind of like using the services means more so like just getting the products of the business, getting the benefits of the business.
So for instance, so you mean like maybe a food co-op where everybody gets food at a discounted rate because of the cooperation.
Yeah, or food co-op where people are buying the services of the co-op. Mm-hmm. Cooperatively owned grocery store. So you could be a member and just by utilizing the services of the food co-op through your purchasing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, but then that definition seems to exclude people who are just rendering a service.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that thought, Rendell, because I think that I'll go back and revisit the definition. Yes, and maybe this is a narrow focus on those people who are members and who use the services, as opposed to people who are members and render the services. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. All right. The next slide, Anna. Okay. So when we look at the history of Black cooperatives, we know the African Americans have utilized cooperatives since the first Africans arrived as indentured servants in the early 17th century. The first recorded cooperative efforts were mutual aid societies in the late 18th century. The early forms of cooperative range from mutual insurance companies to buying clubs to collective farming. The first organized cooperatives was formed by African American women in South Carolina at the Combahee River Colony, where they grew cotton on abandoned farms, remaining independent and eventually becoming a community of several hundred women. Go upstairs and hold on a second. Right. Next slide, Anna. Women often founded and ran African American cooperative efforts. After the Civil War, Black farmers started the Colored Farmers National Alliance and Cooperative Union, where the Southern Farmers Alliance would not admit Black farmers except in separate chapters. And by 1891, the cooperative had more than 1 million members. This is a picture of the Wed Community Food Co-op in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It was a Black-owned food co-op, and you can see on this picture that that they had produce out there that they had selling, and it was a community food co-op. One of the early historians to document cooperatives was W.B. Du Bois. Du Bois wrote about cooperatives in the early turn of the 19th century, 20th century, where he wrote about the establishment of cooperatives and why they were important in terms of building sovereignty, economic sovereignty within the Black community. By 1896, the cooperative union was gone. But in 1922, the National Federation of Colored Farmers formed to increase Black farm ownership and improve farm businesses throughout cooperative buying, production, and marketing. Tenant farmers and sharecroppers joined the cooperative, and by the time it ended 10 years later, most members had been able to buy their own farms. African-American activists were also inspired by the cooperative principles set out by the Rockdale Society of Equitable Pioneers, a co-op founded in 1844 in England, often referred to as the modern white cooperative movement. Many Black-owned consumer cooperatives were established at the end of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. Grocery stores, gas stations, credit unions, insurance co-ops, and other housing co-ops. And so we saw the lift in terms of Black co-ops, particularly around the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. In 1907, as I said before, W. Du Bois held a conference on cooperative and listed 154 current African-American cooperatives. Du Bois spoke in favor of a wide range of cooperatives and alternative economic institutions. Cooperatives have remained a key institution in the toolbox of African-American social movements, where Washington, D.C. was a central location for these social movements and thus has a rich cooperative history. In Ruthville, Virginia, the Black-operated Mercantile Cooperative Company was established in 1901. This successful cooperative coexisted amicably with the white-owned stores across the street. The community also raised money to build a new school, Rockdale Equitable Pioneers, where African-American cooperatives stressed education, hosting study groups, and evening classes. And interestingly, Black colleges were ahead of the curve by teaching cooperative economic theory, most of it as part of their curriculum by 1940s. And so what we've seen now is the last 50, 60, 70 years of moving away from education in terms of the higher education realm in terms of educating Black folks about cooperatives. But we know that in the 1940s, they were a part of their curriculum, a part of the standing curriculum to teach about cooperative economic theory. And so this is a pathway that I feel that we must get back to in terms of educating individuals about starting cooperatives, particularly through higher education realms. The Young Negro Cooperative League, founded in 1930 with a mission to gain economic power through cooperation, although short-lived, this cooperative inspired many other cooperative efforts and trained people who later became activists. For instance, Ella Baker was the league's national director, and she went on to help found SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and one of the seminal groups of the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century. While cooperatives were a training ground for activists and leaders of the civil rights era, a particular success was the Freedom Quilting Bee, founded in 1967. Women from Southern sharecropping families joined to craft and sell quilts. They bought land and built a sewing factory, also selling land to families who had been evicted for civil rights activities. The Freedom Quilting Bee was a founding member of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, which still strives today. The Federation was created to promote cooperative economic development as a strategy and a philosophy to support and sustain Black farmers' ownership and control over land, and to support the economic viability of family and independent farm businesses. The Federation is still operating today, and it was a part of the movement by Fannie Lou Hamer to start. And if you're familiar with the history of Fannie Lou Hamer, she was one of the early voices, Black voices, in terms of starting cooperatives and also echoing out the need to build out cooperative spaces for Black businesses. Next slide, Anna. In Washington, D.C., Black cooperatives were supported by white legislators like Arthur Clapper, a Kansas senator who headed the District of Columbia Committee. Upon his arrival in D.C. in 1919, Clapper submitted a Senate Bill 3066, to allow the formation and incorporation of cooperatives in D.C. itself. In 33 U.S. states, special laws facilitated cooperative institutions, but D.C. did not yet have such laws. Clapper had hoped that Congress would allow D.C. residents to create cooperatives functioning according to England's Rockdale principles. As a member of the Farm Bloc, he successfully sponsored the Clapper-Volstead Act of 1922 and later acts legalizing cooperative marketing and producers associations. These laws allowed farmers to form cooperatives to market their own goods rather than bringing in the realm of larger corporate distributors. Also, there were Black persons like Cornelius Cornbread Givens who advocated by creating cooperatives in D.C. across the U.S. In late 1960s, he became a leader in the Poor People's Campaign, which he later helped form into the Poor People's Development Foundation. The Poor People's Foundation was really evolved out of the Poor People's Campaign of 1968, which was the movement Dr. King led to bring poor people to the U.S. Capitol to echo out the importance of disinvesting in the war in Vietnam and investing more in alleviating poverty. And so the Poor People Development Foundation sought to help poor communities develop cooperatives. They first worked with farmer cooperatives of tenant farmers in 1971. These cooperatives had formed because in response to the Voting Rights Act in 1965, Southern tenant farmers had decided to register to vote and were in retaliation evicted from their tenant farms. Cooperatives were seen as a way to help those farmers survive and also realize the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act more generally. Cornelius Cornbread Givens worked to connect Southern farmers cooperatives with food consumer cooperatives, farmer markets, health food stores, and collective warehouses, which he set up around New York, New Jersey, and New York City. Members of the Poor People's Development trucked food to New York to be sold to farmers and health food stores. So Cornbread Givens was a really a major player in the evolution of cooperatives that grew from 1968, from the founding of the Poor People's Development Foundation until the early 80s. Since then, the organization ran into some difficulties and had to disband around 1982. Next slide, Anna. This is a picture of Arthur Clapper, the senator who passed the bill, Senate Bill 3066, to allow cooperatives to be developed in the District of Columbia. Again, in the 1970s, Cornbread Givens worked to put cooperatives on the National Democratic Party platform. Givens envisioned an entire community development plan: producer cooperatives for jobs, consumer cooperatives, credit unions, low-income housing cooperatives, local charities funded by profits from producer cooperatives that would create social action policy. All this would be organized by a community-wide cooperative. In 1978, Congress passed a law to create the National Consumer Cooperative Bank, which he had advocated. The bank was later renamed the National Cooperative Bank which is still functioning today. Given moved to DC when Marion Barry became mayor in '79 and helped influence Marion Barry's commitment to use his good offices to establish Washington, D.C. as a demonstration city for cooperative development. Cooperatives were one of the many items of the national Black agenda for the 1980s. If you recall, and some of you may be aware that the district has a law called the First Right of Refusal Law, which was implemented under the Berry administration, which allowed tenants the first right to purchase their properties that were put on the market by owners. And the district not only established the first right of refusal law, but also developed within the Department of Housing programs to support financially those groups that were trying to purchase their properties. So they had a first right of refusal program that provided equity financing to put on contracts for properties and later monies to rehab as well as finalize the acquisition cost.
Hey, Ron, that same principle got added into HUD legislation when public housing developments are being demolished or whatever folks want to call it. There's actually language in the federal law that gives residents that first right of refusal, but it's rarely talked about and it's rarely successful, even though I can't remember the lady's name from DC that they kind of championed and was the first.
Oh, Nikki Gray.
Okay, yeah. And so that language is still there, but most tenants and residents don't know it. But it's also complicated because you have to be able to demonstrate that you have the capacity in order to buy the project and do it. But that language that I think came from Marion Barry's effort did find its way into federal code through HUD.
Yeah, you're speaking of Kimmy Gray.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
Yep.
Kimmy Gray, who really was a advocate for public housing tenants, and she really was very instrumental in the Reagan administration through changing Jack Kemp's idea around supporting public housing tenants. And so Jack Kemp was a real strong advocate as the Secretary of Housing and Community Development for supporting low-income people's acquisition of their residence.
Yeah, and to that point, I'm glad you said that because one of the things that I think we need to be mindful of as we deal with the politics. So a young lady who was a deputy secretary of HUD under Jack Kemp and started an investment bank. She is the person that my brother and I connected with in DC, who really worked with us on this whole framework that we've been trying to figure out how to do this for-profit neighborhood equity and trust model. So I think sometimes we have to be careful from a community standpoint that we look for ideals that'll work for us, whether they're on the right side of the aisle or the left side of the aisle, and not assume that one side of the aisle has everything good and another side of the aisle has everything bad. I think we need to be much more strategic in that regard.
Yeah. Well, in '78, again, when Congress passed this law to create the National Consumer Cooperative Bank, it was at the urging of Cornbread Givens and other organizers at that time to infuse a national cooperative bank that would be charged with supporting training and financing of cooperatives. And unfortunately, the story goes on that when in the late '80s, they changed the name of the National Consumer Cooperative Bank to the National Cooperative Bank. And since then, the bank, and I speak from firsthand knowledge, has not really fully told the story of the early Black advocates and other advocates who formed the bank. And so still it was a process to move this financing to a national level, and to embed a perspective that there'll be a national financial institution that would embed itself in cooperative development. Yeah. Next slide, Anna. So, reaching back into 1966, community organizing and capital worked with Greenbelt Consumer Cooperative. Greenbelt Consumer Cooperative was formed in the 40s by Eleanor Roosevelt. And so it's still operating in Greenbelt, Maryland. It has a housing cooperative. It has a grocery store. And in Greenbelt is really one of the telling communities where cooperative development has really been able to sustain itself. Also, in the 1930s, the Capital Cab Company was the nation's largest cab cooperative. In 1970, with the help of Black Markets Inc., community organizers started the nation's first food co-op in public housing. The MLK Cooperative Store, #2 in Arthur Crapper's lasted until 1995. And I'm checking on this. In 1996, the Women's Community Bakery was created, which lasted until 92. So we've had work that has gone on around Black cooperatives since the 1900s. And during each period of time, it's a matter of sustainability that has really arisen. And a part of it, the lack of sustainability would have been the lack of support from a national perspective, which is why this National Cooperative Bank was formed. And up until like the 80s, early 80s, that bank really was very instrumental in financing cooperatives until it took a different pathway in terms of looking at market rate and other cooperatives in other communities, as opposed to looking at financing cooperative work in low, underserved communities. Anna? Black Wall Street. We hear a lot of stories about Black Wall Street, and we've really come to understand the pathways to this community in Greenville, Oklahoma, that spurred 600 Black-owned businesses, 21 churches, 21 restaurants, 30 grocery stores, 2 movie theaters, 6 private airplanes, 1 hospital, 1 bank, and its own school system. That's the epitome of Black economic development. And not only in Greenville, Oklahoma, but also in other cities around the country. In Charlotte, North Carolina, there was a Black town that was burnt down as well. Rosewood in Florida, another Black town that was burnt down as well. And so it really begs to bring to the forefront the discussion of you can't live with us, but can't live without us. And really, that really was the impetus for the violent overthrow of Black cities, was that economically there was not a willingness to incorporate Blacks in the economic structure of the city and the cities they were in, but to also to display and disengage any economic development that Blacks had as a result of separate but equal opportunities that they were creating for themselves. Anyone want to share anything with your knowledge of Black Wall Street entail?
Hey, Ron, I had a question. Is it fair to say that Washington, D.C. is a trailblazer in co-op development, Black co-op development?
Well, it was. It was. It was. I say it was because it has certainly taken on a different posture in recent years. Under the Berry administration, and they still do have the first right of refusal law in place, but given the escalating prices of real estate now in the District of Columbia, many property owners aren't selling their properties. They're maintaining ownership of the properties. So the law is rarely utilized here in the District of Columbia under the first right of refusal law as it once was, when there were a lot of properties being put on the market because of the underserved communities in which they were located in. But now these underserved communities are now marketable communities, and the value of the properties has increased.
Right.
So yes, and so that law right now, unfortunately, is underutilized here in the District of Columbia in terms of first right of refusal law.
Yeah, but you were also mentioning all of those other startup organizations, and it seemed to all kind of sprout around Washington, D.C.
Yes, well, Washington, D.C., again, you know, the early organizers in the city were people from the South. Let me just preface that too. They were people from the South. Marion Berry was from the South. Cornbread Gibbons from the South. So they had a different civil rights strategy as opposed to those from the North. And so in that, they promoted and supported Cornbread Gibbons' idea about cooperatives here in his district. And Berry, doing his first run for mayor, made it a priority on his legislative agenda to develop cooperatives. So there was a big push towards cooperative ecosystem development, cooperative development in the district during Marion Berry's tenure as mayor. Unfortunately, the group Poor People's Development Foundation ran into some legal issues because of one of the members of the group of organizers sought to utilize the group in terms of hiding some monies, using it to funnel some campaign funds through, and so it certainly left a scar on the organization, which later led to its demise.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Next slide, Anna. So, to revisit just the cooperative values, and these are international cooperative values, the values of which the modern cooperative movement was founded, and the basis of the organization of every cooperative enterprise in the world today are embedded in equity, carry businesses in a way that is fair and unbiased, equality, each member has a right to be treated the same and with respect, self-help, help people while they help themselves by working together, self-responsibility, take responsibility for and answer to actions, democracy, give members an equal say and right to contribute, and solidarity, share interests and common purpose with members and other cooperatives. So these 6 values are the values that have been embedded in the international cooperative value system. And I think that they are suitable to how people see cooperative work going forward in terms of the values. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Anna. So what I tend to do is embed the principles of Nuga Saba. and these principles are associated with the Kwanzaa principles. But I think that they're principles that can be utilized throughout our work in terms of building cooperatives. And so day one, principle one is Ujoma, which means unity, to strive for and maintain unity in the family, community, race, and nation. Principle number two, Kukulalia, self-determination, to define ourselves, create for ourselves, and speak for ourselves. Day three, Ujema, collective work and responsibility, to build and keep our community together, to make our brothers and sisters' problems our problems, and to solve them together. Day four, Ujama, to build and manage our own stores, shops, and businesses, and to profit from them together. Number five, near purpose, to make our collective vocation the building and development of our community in order to restore our people in their traditional greatness. Number six, Kumba, creativity, to always, as much as we can, in the way we can in order to leave our community more beautiful and beneficial than we inherited. And number seven, Imani, faith, to believe with all our hearts in our parents, our teachers, our leaders, our people, and the righteousness of our community. I think that these seven principles are really important in terms of building out culturally the connectivity, the connective tissue to why we do the work that we do. And embedding these seven principles in a way that brings and lifts up the Black community. Brother Ron Karinga, who developed these seven Nugasaba principles, have for the last 30, 40 years, I think, have instilled them into us as people in terms of these seven principles, in terms of how we look at ourselves, how we build among ourselves, putting faith as the impetus in terms of why we do what we do, our creativity. Yes. So as you look to grow your cooperative, I think it be to your benefit to look at these seven principles and embed them in your work, in terms of culturally and spiritually, embedding the work of why we need to do this work around Nugasaba principles and building out cooperatives. Any comments?
Well, I think that's absolutely right, Ron. What has been done to our community is the exact opposite. The culture has really divided us and pit us against one another. And so, the reverse of that has to be, the healing process.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I like all what has been said in those seven principles.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Next slide, Anna. So, just opposed to the seven principles of Nugasaba are the seven international principles of cooperative. And so, and I share these seven principles, international principles, because again, they hold some relevancy to where we are in terms of developing cooperatives. Voluntary and open membership is the first one. Anyone can join a co-op. They don't discriminate based on gender, social, racial, or political or religious factors. Democratic members control their business by deciding how it's run and who leads it. Number three, members have economic participation. All co-op members invest in a cooperative. This means people, not shareholders, benefit from co-op profits, autonomy, and independence. While making business deals or raising money, co-ops never compromise their autonomy or democratic member control. Number 5, education, training, and information. Co-ops provide education, training, and information so that members can control effectively to the success of the co-ops. Number 6, cooperative among cooperatives. Co-op believe working together in the best strategy to improve their members and build a stronger co-op economy. And 7, concern for community. Cooperatives are community-minded. They contribute to the sustainable development of the community by sourcing and investing locally. And so I think that these 7 principles hold some relevancy as well in terms of the international cooperative principles of cooperatives, why they develop. And I think that as you juxtapose using these 7 principles of Nuga Saba along with these 7 international principles, I think that you find yourself in a better space in terms of growing out why it's important to do this work and what this work leads to in terms of embedding solidarity and sustainability for cooperatives.
Brother Ron, I have a question.
Yes.
What do you say to a person who supposedly within the circle and tribe, for lack of a better word, that says that this is great theoretically, but that's just what it is, more of a theory as opposed to a certainty or assurance?
Yeah, I agree with you because theory doesn't become practice until it's practice.
Yes.
And so with this said, I would say that works if you work it, and so that you have to really embed the practice of incorporating this language in the work that you're doing. Again, the 7 principles of Nuga Saba may apply more effectively than these 7 international principles. And then you may want to use the international principles to support your 7 Nuga Saba principles. But I think there's work to be considered in the combining of the 7 principles of Nuga Saba and looking at, again, the 7 international cooperative principles. Because I think that the 7 principles of Nuga Saba really take into heart the meaning and around the 7 cultural principles that we need to have, and then looking at the international cooperative as the 7 principles that we can supplement those 7 Nuga Saba principles with. I hope I'm echoing out your a suitable response to your question.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Anna. Dreamland Theater was the only colored theater in the town of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and in the Greenville community. Just wanted to show that that there was a sustainable economic system in Greenville, the community of Greenville, Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Was it burnt down as well?
Yep, it was burned down as well. And the 40 square blocks that community entailed now is down to 2 blocks. So it was a really effort to not address the issues around a Black man accosting a white woman, but really an effort to take back the Black wealth that was inherent in this community. That's what it was, effort to take back the black wealth. And so once they did that, it never returned to the status that it was. Many blacks left the area because of the fear of reprisal, hostile reprisals from whites. Yeah. Go ahead, Anna. Okay, so the business types of cooperatives, and this goes back to what Rodney has said about, sharing knowledge about, the other cooperatives. So there are 5 types of cooperatives. They're retail, there's worker, there's producer, there's service, and there's housing. So retail, organized as communities, other types of local groups owning their own retail stores, allowing consumers the opportunity to supply their own needs, gain bargaining power, and share earnings. Often found in small communities where local businesses have shut down. Examples: food, hardware, agricultural products. Worker-owned cooperatives are members are both employees of the business as well as owners of the cooperative. The examples of bakery, retail stores, software development groups, aquaculture. Third is producer. Producer cooperatives are created by producers and owned by and operated by producers. Producers can decide to work together or as separate entities to help increase marketing possibilities and production efficiency. Examples: agricultural products, lumber companies, carpentry, and as well as crafts. Service: allow consumers the opportunity to supply their own needs, gain bargaining power, and share earnings. Organized to give members more control over the services they offer. Examples of service cooperatives such as childcare, healthcare, clinics, and funeral service. Housing: provide a unique form of home ownership, allowing homeowners the opportunity to share costs of home ownership or building. Organized as an incorporated business formed by people who wish to provide and jointly own their housing. Examples: condominiums, rentals, single-family homes, market rate, limited equity. All those can be formed under cooperative housing. So these 5 types of businesses are what entails cooperatively owned businesses. And so and all of you are falling within one of these 5 areas. Either you're looking at worker, producer, service, housing, or retail.
Number 2.
Worker. Yeah. In terms of just a black cooperative movement, we have Ujima Collective in Pittsburgh, Mandela Food Corporation, Mandela Grocery, which is a worker-owned cooperative, which is out in the Bay Area in Oakland. Cooperation Jackson is in Jackson, Mississippi, and Detroit Food Co-op is up in Detroit, Michigan. And all these are still operating. Institutional cooperative businesses, some of these you maybe know: Land Lakes, Blue Diamond, Ace Hardware, Gold Kiss Farms, and Ocean Spray. All those are institutional cooperative businesses.
What's that mean?
Well, which means that they're corporate businesses. They're corporately owned cooperatives.
What, the shareholder owns, is that way?
Yep, that's what they are. They're shareholder owned. Yep. And it's a booklet that the National Consumer Cooperative Bank published, where it lists over 100 institutional cooperative businesses. And the biggest cooperatively owned businesses are your utility companies, your electrical companies, because they were established in the 1930s under the Roosevelt administration. So electrical co-ops are a big part of this institutional cooperative business ecosystem. All right. Questions?
So, Ron, is any shareholder company also considered a cooperative?
Yes. Yes.
You
As
mean
long as it's operating democratically and under cooperative principles. Let me just preface that. Because you can have shareholder companies that are privately held by shareholders. Which doesn't operate democratically and doesn't infuse cooperative principles in the formation of the company.
Oh, right. I got you.
Yeah. Any comments? I know I covered a lot in just giving you a history, going back and forth between the time periods. But where are we at today? That's the question that we have to ask ourselves, where we're at today in teaching our communities, our constituents about the history of cooperatives. Because I think that once we know the history, it empowers us to learn and grow more around this cooperative work. And which is one of my disagreements with the National Cooperative Bank, is that they sort of told a limited story in terms of the participation of Cornbread, Givens, and others in this formation. Because I think once we understand that we were involved in cooperative development, it really is an empowering a pathway for us as people to know that we had cooperatives and that we were working cooperatively together. And so now it's how do we get back to framing out that discussion and framing out that framework around our involvement in cooperatives.
Yeah, I think the history is important, but I also think that we have to modernize the context for today. So I'm not surprised by the cooperatives historical movement up through Jim Crow, because the forced segregation, the forced overt geographical telling a person where they have to live and who they can associate with forces and sometimes creates these opportunities for cooperating when somebody is forcing it on you. And I think that what we have seen since we've had success with breaking down Jim Crow and providing greater opportunities for people to live in their places of choice, greater opportunity. You know, we still have Jim Crow legacy with us today. Requires newer and more modernized thinking. And that's where I think these efforts around crowdfunding and using technology and using other connections. So even as the Black middle class in some respects may have migrated, at least portions of it, out into the suburbs, people still go to their often still go to their home church. They still go to the barbershop. They still come back and go to grandma's house. So I think we have to find ways of providing that connectivity to the places from which we were, and also make sure that we are providing leverage opportunities for people who may be in different places now. And in my opinion, move away from trying to guilt people when they move to what they consider to be opportunity, but be more strategic in our pathways in trying to provide that connectivity. And to me, that's what's embedded in the Nguzo Osaba, and that's what's embedded in Kwanzaa. And that's what, frankly, what I've gotten from this academy is ways of maintaining connectivity and having impact, even if I'm no longer forced to live in a place. I can potentially support Wendell in Baltimore, and I can be in Norfolk because of the network that we've established. I don't necessarily have to live in Baltimore anymore. And I just have a personal concern that sometimes when we, my words, romanticize about Black Wall Street and Tulsa and Greenville and Rosewood, we don't deal with the other side of the coin of, frankly, the white man telling us this is where you must live. So somehow we need to grab the genius of our ancestors that produced these cooperative institutions and align it with the opportunity and the technology and the access to information that we have today, so that we aren't just talking about what they did. We're talking about what we've learned from what they did and combining it with the opportunities that we have today.
So eloquently put, Rodney. Really, so eloquently put. And it's about learning from the history and using it to learn lessons from the history to grow and create more sustainable efforts going forward. I agree with you totally in that.
Yeah, I like what you said too, Rodney. One of the challenges that I've kind of created for myself is how can we make those areas that have been deserted attractive to a point where it might cause folks to want to come back. And I know that's a big hill to climb.
So, one day, one of the sessions, I got in trouble because I said something when you were talking about the lot that nobody wanted to clean up.
Yeah.
But what you're describing is really what, Jamie and Levette and I have been working on, is trying to find that balance between rewarding folks that just the way I talk, live through the hill of crime and drugs and disinvestment, are working to create a place that's more attractive so that people will want to come and live in the place. But also, to me, why the cooperative model is so important, but then being able to have that growth and development without just simply displacing people that don't want to be displaced. And that's what we're trying to figure out, that ownership model, and even building into our development plans, how we can do things like a cooperative housing, so that we just don't repeat the cycle of disinvest and then gentrify and push out. We want to have healthy communities where people want to live, but where everybody can have the opportunity to live.
Yeah. And I like what you said about, supporting, even if you're not, a part of that community, because, city living isn't for everybody, and the way the city is now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend people that want to raise their children, I wouldn't recommend that they not take their children to the better schools, right? But at the same time, can we kind of create those businesses, barbershops, cafes, restaurants in the city that would at least attract that business? Do you understand what I'm saying?
And I think that's where the history shows us that we can. We just have to, we have to do it in today's environment.
Yeah. I do believe that, Rodney, hitting on ownership is so important, because with ownership you can create value. With ownership you can create value, and so our charge going forward is to create value through ownership in our community, and that ownership can take several different pathways. Ownership for those who live there now, or ownership for those who may want to invest in the community and may not want to live there. And so we have to straddle that fine line of creating ownership for those who want to live there and those who want to invest there. And the investment means that you invest with a sense of integrity around why you're investing. You're investing for the people who intended to live there.
Yeah.
And not investing for people to take advantage of the investment opportunity, but to invest in a way that builds opportunity for others.
Yeah.
To see themselves in a much more valued way. And I'm quite sure that's what Rodney is doing in terms of what he's doing in terms of investing, not only for people who live there, but look at investing for others to invest in the people that look at living there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that that's the big piece that we have to figure out. You know, the ownership and creating value.
Yeah, because the way it is now, you know, most of the money is just siphoned out of the community by people who, you know, don't live there, don't really have a vested interest in there, you know. And, you know, it's the whole idea of the, you know, every dollar spent immediately goes out of the community, right?
Yeah.
Instead of circulating a couple times.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, it's documented that the turnaround in terms of Black dollar in the Black community is less than 8 hours. In less than 8 hours, not even one 24-hour period. 8 hours. And that's because of the lack of ownership in our community.
Yeah.
The lack of ownership in our community in real estate, in commercial development, and business, the lack of ownership. So others who own, once they capitalize on the opportunity of investing, they take the money out.
Yeah.
That's true, Brother Ron. That's true.
And we have to go ahead, Antoine.
I think that I did some research. I think in the Asian community, the dollar stays anywhere from 17 to 20 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're right, the Black community, 6 to 7 hours.
Yeah.
8 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have to really understand what the dynamics is in terms of ownership. Mm-hmm. Even down to a mom and pop store. Because that mom and pop store is not there to not make money.
Right.
And not there to seize the opportunity to make money. That's why they come. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So quietly kept, it could be $1 million business.
Quietly kept.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You look at it as a mom and pop operation, but it could be a mom and pop $1 million business.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I used to own a small coffee shop, co-own a small coffee shop, and people that I grew up with will walk right past the coffee shop, knowing that we own it from the community, and go to the local Korean store.
Yeah.
Money. That was a bunch of reasons for that, but still on the surface, I couldn't look at it outside of being painful.
Yeah. You know, we don't have these conversations with external stakeholders in our community, but it's coming to a point in time where we need to have conversations with external stakeholders, because they are, you know, the primary business owners in our community.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Who are extracting dollars out of our community. And that's what they're doing. They're creating extractive economies where they extract wealth out of our community and not invest in our community.
Yeah.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is there a modern day saboteur comparable to Black Wall Street in that time. Is that a conversation, or is that an awareness, you know, that a discussion could be had around?
Well, I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. And it needs to start with us, around us, and building out, you know, the ecosystem to support it. I mean, like Antoine said, he had a coffee shop, and people were feeling not supportive of his business, but supporting the other business. And I think that there's two pathways. There's an immediate pathway and there's a long-term pathway. And a long-term pathway is education. The immediate pathway is that you come and service you service the business. And I think that we need to find strategies to support the immediacy of supporting the business, and a long-term strategy of implementing education around what it takes and why you need to support Black businesses. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Because we're not going to get far without ownership.
That's true.
We're not going to make the inroads that we need to make in our communities without ownership.
Agreed.
And ownership is certainly paramount to this work that we all embeddingly doing. So that's
most people don't.
Go ahead.
Most people don't know ownership is the dance partner to empowerment.
That's right. That's right. And so we have to be able to echo that out in our work. We got to put ownership at the forefront of our discussions. We have to put the forefront in our discussion, ownership. And that's what we're attempting to do as an organization. And put out there the importance of ownership.
Yeah.
Ownership. However we get there, ownership is the pathway for liberation of Black communities.
Yeah. And that education piece that you talk about, Ron, is important. Down, you know, on the resident level, and not just in, you know, these kind of academic silos. Because like Antoine said, you know, the folks need to know, you know, why we're there and what our mission and goal is, you know, and why you should support us, you know, and not take your dollars to one who's going to extract the dollar out of the community.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think going back to the engagement in the ecosystem, now if in our cooperatives, if the community owned or was a cooperative participant in Antoine's coffee shop, they would then be walking past their own coffee shop. And so I think to me, this is what is exciting about what we're all working on. I think we can change that dynamic. And frankly, Ron, in terms of the next sessions, that's, you know, I'm going to talk to Jamie and Levette about it, but that's what I hope we can do, is look in our community at the next level of or orbit of influencers that maybe we can get to come and go through this academy, so that we're kind of educating people through the academy what it is that we're trying to do, so that we can build a larger group of folks that at least understand the language and the effort, you know, as we move forward.
Yeah. That's you know, none of this happens without education and re-education. You know, and it's re-education of Black folks that we have to One second.
And by the way, Brother Rodney, we had 14 people from the community. You would think that they would see that as ownership and empowerment, but I guess these are things that we could have emphasized and expressed as what we were trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
We shouldn't have assumed
right.
they were recognized.
And I think the other thing we have to be careful about is, my family owned a local convenience store in the community. And because we did have loyal customers, we couldn't afford the Wawa gas prices. Our gas prices were higher because we didn't do the volume. But what we did in terms of giving back to the community and other things that we're trying to return to the community helped to build some of that loyalty. But I also think we have to be careful that we don't say, just because I'm here, we don't have to compete and we don't have to provide the quality of the products and services. So we've got to be able to do both.
Yeah.
Be willing to take the risk, but then also compete in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, y'all dredging up some memories. I need to go get some therapy after this.
You do it. I'm going through the same thing now. You did it for me too. All right, go. I still got books at the store, because we closed the store a few years ago, and I still got all these books where folks would come up and my father, my aunt, and other folks say, okay, yeah, you can, go ahead and take the product. We know that you'll bring back the money later. And I still got notebooks and notebooks and notebooks still later.
Oh, wow. That is old school right there. Man, I didn't even know they were still doing that.
Yeah. That's part of that. That's part of that cultural motif. But But eventually people would do it. It's another way of credit without doing the predatory lending. But
wow,
you got to be able to sustain it.
Yeah.
Well, let me share, if Antoine and Wendell don't mind. I'll share what we decided to do working with the Johnson Park folks in Baltimore, and so we're going to explore developing a co-op with them around returning citizens. So they're doing the homework now in terms of looking at models that we can look at and replicate. And hopefully part of the education will be visiting these models in 2023 to get a better understanding of how they operate. And so, Rodney, I offer the same opportunity to you in terms of you and Jamie, is that we should look at what it is going to take to grow a cooperative in your area, and it may just be just a simple thing of just getting people engaged and building out the pathway for them to engage and identifying them, or it may take on another perspective in terms of working at developing a cooperatively owned housing project in Richmond. And what it would need to be to implement some legislation in the area that will support it.
Remember, we're Norfolk.
Norfolk, yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So yeah. So any more discussion that we need to have or we should have?
Just thank you, and again, enjoyed the class, and hope that you all will continue to email us with other networking or events and educational opportunities.
Well, I say this here that we and I said this before, that we're hosting the National Conference on Black Cooperative Agenda in Vegas, June 1st to June 3rd. We're putting some real intentional thought in terms of what kind of sessions that we're going to host at this particular conference. I will share with you that one of them is going to be on the on. And I just talked with the facilitator yesterday about how to develop a credit union. Yeah, how to develop a credit union. And so, yeah, one of them is going to be on terms of how to develop a grocery store. And so we have some practitioners who've gone through the process of developing a grocery store in their community, and have them share out the lessons that they learned. So I think that all you if not, Anna, put them, make sure that they're on in the constant contact, so that we can share with them the progress on where we are with the conference. And so because I think, again, I'm a believer in education. And educating people is the pathway for enlightening them and making them aware. And once you make them aware, then it's accountability that really comes to the table. Because you can no longer stand on that, I didn't know.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can no longer stand on that space where I didn't know. No, you know, when you know, you know. So yeah, so I'll certainly take your suggestions, Rodney and Antoine and Wendell, and work on as we meet in January to frame out the new pathway for this cooperative academy, looking at the next level in terms of supporting your groups. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm tell you something. I'm so appreciative of your commitment to this academy, and your commitment actually to yourselves, because we can't do this work without you having a commitment to embed the work in the work that you're doing. So I really appreciate that which you have brought to the table.
Yep.
So, folks, this is our last academy, and but it's not our last word.
That's right.
It's not the last word that you'll hear from us. So Rodney, once you get together and you want to have that discussion, I'm open to have it with you. All right. All right. Well, it's almost 12 o'clock, and so I'm quite sure on this rainy Saturday, you got some things to do. I guess some of you are going to do some holiday shopping.
I would like to,
Yeah, yeah.
but I had a failed business, so I don't think too many people are expecting too many gifts.
Believe me, that has nothing to do with it.
All right. Well, great. Well, we'll conclude for the time being. Certainly, again, I appreciate how you've shown up. Look forward to working with you in the future, and feel free to reach out to me. All right. Feel free to reach out to us.
For sure.
All right.
Yep. So,
Okay.
Brother Ron, we'll see you on the 13th.
Yes, we will.
The
That's right. We got it on the calendar.
All right.
All right.
It's hard to say
It's a
goodbye.
pleasure. Be in touch.
All right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Roger.
Everyone.
All right.